Imagine I told you that some guy built my house without using a tape measure. Would you believe me? I hope not. Either that is not a true story, or my house is very noticeable. A good builder would never attempt to build something of significance like a house without having some standard tool for measuring. As ridiculous as it sounds for one man to build a house without a tape measure, and it does, now imagine a whole crew of builders working on that same house without relying on the standard, accurate, and agreed upon measurement of a tape measure. We all know that this scenario would not end well. With everybody just eyeballing it, the house would be a mess. Now, imagine that I told you some worship team led worship music without using a metronome. Would you believe me? Yes, you probably would. For some unknown reason, we have been fooled into believing that a metronome is something that only beginners or crazy old piano teachers use. No, that is not true. It may surprise you to know that professional musicians use a metronome pretty much all of the time. Let's talk about that a little bit more on today's weekly worship thought. You may already be using a metronome. If so, great. You're probably already well aware of the many benefits of doing so. Or maybe you are team anti-metronome because you want to just feel the music. Well, that's great, but it's not overly conducive to good music if the rest of the musicians are not feeling the same groove that you are. Today I want to talk through a few key uses of the metronome, and I want to encourage you to use one as much as possible. A metronome is used when writing a song. Whenever I'm writing a song, I try to get an idea for the tempo of the song as early into the process as possible. This helps to make sure that all of the expressions fit into the same basic time parameters. Without a metronome, verses, choruses, bridges, and interludes may develop their own individual feel and be disjointed when they all come together as one. So one of the first things I like to do when writing a song is to decide what BPM, or beats per minute, best fits the melody or chord progression with which I am working. While I may make adjustments to the overall BPM as I continue to write, the metronome is an important part of the process. A metronome is used when practicing a song. I like to make sure the entire worship team knows in advance what BPM we'll be using for each song. This can be accomplished by simply including the tempo information on the song sheet. Knowing the BPM is nearly as important as knowing the key for each song. I always try to practice in the right key with the correct tempo. If everyone on the worship team is doing this during their personal practice time, the song will come together naturally when we rehearse as a team. Otherwise, it is likely that the song will feel too fast or too slow when we all come together to practice or rehearse. This is because if I've been practicing the song on my own at a tempo that is literally either faster or slower than we're going to play it together, then when we come together, it's going to feel faster or slower. So I always say, practice like you play because you're going to play like you've practiced. A metronome is used when recording a song. Every time I set up a recording session, I first enter the beats per minute of the song. In fact, I often do this even before I enter the key of the song, although that part is important as well. During the recording process, musicians don't always record at the same time. Often days or weeks will go by between recording one instrument and then the other, so the only way to hold the song together is with a metronome. This is often called the click track in the recording world. Each musician listens to the click track while they are recording their part. Since each musician is using the same standard, accurate, and agreed upon measurement, each individual part will fit perfectly together into the whole. Finally, a metronome can even be used when playing live. Personally, I prefer this, as does nearly every professional touring musician I know of. While using a metronome for playing live is not always possible in a church setting, a few small adjustments can get you on the road to better timing. Consistent personal practice with the metronome will increase the overall feel and timing of each musician, even if the metronome is not used live. Plugging a metronome into the system and letting it come through the floor monitors during rehearsal is a simple way to improve the overall feel and timing of the worship team as a group. And if your worship team uses in-ear monitors, you can have the metronome running during both the rehearsal and the actual service without it becoming a distraction to the congregation. The metronome is one of the simplest, most helpful, and often most underutilized tools of the trade for musicians. A builder would never attempt to build a house without a tape measure in their tool belt, and musicians should never attempt to build a musical worship set without the consistent use of a metronome. All right, let's talk about practically using a metronome. I've got my favorite metronome here, and these things come in all different shapes, styles, colors. You can get the old analog ones that go back and forth. You can get a digital one. This is actually a digital metronome, but it's kind of in the old analog shape, and I think that's kind of cool. But practically speaking, how do you use this thing? Well, it's very simple. This particular one's got a tap function at the top. I was just tapping in 236 BPM. What's that sound like? Wow, that's crazy. But I'm about to play the song Lead Us to Righteousness. I want to practice that. So let's just tap it in. What do I think it is? Now this is just my natural feeling. I'm aiming for 72 BPM because that's what the song is played at, and my natural, oh, I got the 74, so that wasn't too bad. I can use the little rotary dial here to get it right down to 72. Now we're right on the money. Also, you can see there's the 4 here. You want to set how many beats are in the measure. So when it's set to 4, that's going to be a 4/4 measure. If it would be set to 3, then you would have 3 beats in a measure, 3/4 times, so on and so forth. Then of course, each of these will have a volume. And you basically just want to be able to lock this thing in and practice along with it. A lot of more beginning musicians, or maybe musicians who don't know any better, a lot of times they will think of songs in a couple of different ways. And one of the inaccurate ways that they'll think of songs is that songs have a slow part and a fast part. And what they mean by that a lot of times is that when there's just maybe one instrument in the song and a vocal, then that's the slow part. And then whenever all the instrumentation comes in, there's maybe a big chorus or a big bridge or something, that's the fast part of the song. That's not right. That's technically inaccurate. It's not good dynamics. The truth is, every part of the song should be played at the same tempo, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, that holds true. So this song, Lead Us to Righteousness, I have a tendency of playing the intro too fast. And then when I go into the verse, I slow it down. It's a little slower. Then when I get to the chorus, I speed it up and I play it too fast again when I'm not using a metronome. So this thing helps me a lot. If I were not playing with a metronome, I might do something like this. Lonely desire be here with you. That was a little extreme, but in that example, I played the riff, the opening riff, way too fast, and I slowed way too down for the verse. The solution? Metronome. So we turn this thing on, and you want to count with the accent. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Lonely desire to be here with you. We thirst for your presence and hunger for truth. And we can keep going with the song. Now maybe my next trouble spot is going to be when we get to the chorus. Maybe I'll want to speed that up because it's kind of a big part of the song, but this really helps me when I've got the metronome going because I can just lock into that groove. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2. In the chorus now. Lead us to righteousness. Lead us to your glory, O God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2. Over all and in all, let your kingdom come through us. And this thing just helps me to stay locked in. I would encourage you, practice with a metronome. It will help your timing. You will become naturally better when you practice with it. If at all possible, use the metronome whenever you're practicing with a band and there's no audience. It's not going to hurt anything for this sound to be coming through the speakers, helping you guys get locked in. Now, you might notice at the top of this, there's a little bit of a flashing thing that's happening. So even if there was no volume, you could still use this on stage if you wanted to. There's a visual cue there letting you know what the tempo is. But if you're not using in-ear monitors, it's not realistic to use a metronome whenever you're playing live, unless you have like one of those fancy watches that vibrate on your wrist or something like that. But make sure you are using a metronome at every chance you possibly can when you're practicing, when you're rehearsing, and if possible, even when you're playing live. What do you think about the comparison of builders using a tape measure to musicians using a metronome? Is that an overstatement or a helpful example? Do you currently use a metronome for personal practice, band rehearsal, and/or playing live? If so, in what ways have you found it to be helpful? If not, why not? When you are not using a metronome, do you think you tend to speed up or slow down during different parts of a song? How important do you think it is that each musician is using a metronome in their personal practice time? Would there be any advantage to vocalists practicing with a metronome? Why or why not?